So I rolled through turn 3 of Next War India-Pakistan here in this scenario called Border War, and turn 3 we had storms as weather, and that pretty much cut out any impact that the air war was going to have. And the Pakistani side, with still a lot more aircraft to fly at that stage, won air supremacy and bumped their advantage on the AWACS track right the way up to the maximum of 4. So we've and then they also in the ground war managed to capture this urban hex here, Ritsar, just here. That was a big victory for them, and they took this city hex over here, and that was also very satisfying. And that was pretty much it. They might have caused the odd casualty, but they didn't get anywhere close to the 20 victory points for an initiative turn. So we're back in turn 4 in a contested turn. I've done the air war, and there are quite a lot of survivors in the air superiority box on both sides, about 10 on the Indian side and 15 or 16 on the Chinese side. The Americans have brought in, I was wrong, they have brought in some of this super stealth stuff. They've got an F-35 here, which is all-weather, stealthy with the long-range capability. And they've also got these F-15s, which are not stealthy, but they've also got the long range. So if this beast, for example, goes up against, let's just grab an opposing plane, say it was up against this thing here, it would fire on the +1 at long range, because it's got long range and it's 5 against 4. And then it would fire again at standoff range at +1. If it hadn't already aborted or damaged or whatever this aircraft, it would fire again at +1 on the standoff range. And this couldn't fire back because this is stealthy. And then they'd get into dogfighting, and this would fire on the +1 column again with a further -2 for his pilot. And this thing would be toast long before we got there, in all probability. And the reality is that after the long range exchange, if the J-10 hadn't been destroyed or damaged or whatever, or aborted, it would abort naturally. It would, the I, as the Chinese player would say, that is aborting, and this thing would just win its air superiority duel, but I'd be thankful to get away without losses. So these are quite mean aircraft. But there's only one of them, and that isn't enough to sort of turn the tide in this air war particularly quickly. So there's a lot of stuff there that could fly patrol or escorts, and not a lot left that can fly missions on either side. The Chinese have a few sort of multi-role aircraft here that could actually fly strike missions, and the Americans have a stealthy B-2 with a 5 strike capability and unlimited range. They've got some wild weasel flights that could go in and attack the SAM and detection tracks. And they've got another wild weasel flight over here. So down here, if we have a look at those tracks, you can see the Indian tracks have been really heavily mauled, and this is by combined Pakistan and Chinese special forces missions going in and wrecking these sites, and the counter missions by the Indians and Americans hasn't been quite so good. So the Pakistan military has been able to build up its detection and surface-to-air missile capabilities quite well. So what else can I say as we're in turn 4? Yeah, the victory point difference currently sitting at 56. The automatic victory level is 35. So unless the India allied player can claw back 20 points, 22 points this turn, in other words win 22 points more than they lose, then there's going to be an automatic victory roll at the end of this turn and probably next turn and so on. And knowing that, I've come up with I've had to look at, well, what are each side trying to achieve now? Well, pretty much Pakistan is happy to hold its gains now. They've had some more reinforcements arrive. They've had another corps arrive up here. They've had another corps arrive up here. They've got a whole Chinese airborne battalion arrive there. Another one arrive up over here. And so they can just strengthen their lines and try and hold on to the victory points they have. I think the Indian side has to do a bit of a Hail Mary this turn and throw some of these cruise missiles around and try and wipe out some air bases in Pakistan. Try and score some victory points for wiping out airfields, air bases, and hope to get some collateral hits on some aircraft so that they can score some VPs that way as well. And they'll be throwing their special forces missions into that as well, which is where we currently are in turn 4. I'm in the special ops phase. So that's the state of play. We're looking like we're going to run through turn 4 and then roll for automatic victory for Pakistan, and turn 5 might be much the same, and then unless things really change quite radically. So coming to the end of turn 4 then, here in border war in next war India Pakistan, and not a huge amount has changed on the ground. The Pakistan forces have pulled back into defensible positions behind rivers, just holding their gains because they've got no real need to push further. They're so far ahead. Garrisoned Lahore, just pulling back into areas where they can hold what they've got. They've got more troops up here. They've got Chinese forces holding rear areas. They've got another lot of Chinese forces holding up here. They've got Islamabad garrisoned. We've got a static position here. They're absolutely fine and set. So they didn't really feel the need to do a lot. What did happen this turn was that the Indian side with American backup launched a lot of cruise missile strikes, backed up with ballistic missile strikes at all the air bases and airfields they could find. And you can see all across here these red and black destroyed markers littering all the air bases and airfields. Another one in there, another one up over there. So a total of 7 airfields and air bases wiped out by cruise missile strikes. So that was an attempt to just change the victory point situation a little bit. You can see down here that just with those strikes they picked up a total of 9 victory points, and Pakistan only picked up 2. So I don't quite know where that's going to move us on to, but I could work it out. But as I was doing this, I realised that Pakistan was still going to be way over the 35 point threshold to get a roll on the victory point table, and I thought, well, instead of doing all the work and then rolling and finding out that the game's ended, I'll make a roll now. So here's the table. It's the first time they've rolled. On a 0 they win, on a 1 through 9 they don't win, and I rolled a 0. And then thinking, no, that can't be right, let's keep it going a little bit longer. So I picked up the dice and rolled it again and rolled a 0, and at that point I thought, okay, we'll call it a Pakistan win then, because that's how the game will go sometimes. You will get the games where someone leaps out into a lead, gets a lucky roll on the victory point table, and boom, they've won the game in 4 turns and it's all over. And that's what's happened here. Equally, you will get games where they can't roll a roll to save their lives, and the game will go on and on and on, and the other side will claw back, and suddenly it'll be all up in all in the balance again. But here the game's not gone long enough for the Allied side, the Indian American side, to ever get going, and they've only just started getting ground troops as reinforcements. They've got part of a corps just arrived here, they've got some artillery just arrived here, but that was their only ground reinforcements this turn, and it's not, to be blunt, going to make a dent on this, what's facing them. It really isn't. The combat system really does require you to overwhelm things. You don't want to be going in on evens combats or 2-to-1 combats. You want to be going in 5-to-1, 6-to-1. So the chances of this force making much difference wasn't that great. To be fair, the air war would have just swung heavily in the Allied favour. You can see all this American stuff, another whole raft of American aircraft showed up, and they've now got some serious force in there with these stealth, long-range stealth fighters and these guys, and yeah, some stuff with 5 strike capability there, and a bomber with 5 strike capability there, and 6 strike capability there, and that's stealthy, and yeah, on top of what they've got for the Indian Air Force and their carrier forces as well. This was going to start wrecking the Pakistan-China air in short order, especially since the this lot were going to take the effects of all those air bases and airfields being destroyed this turn, and would have been moved down. A lot of them would have been moved down into the flying box, and there would have just been this Chinese air to face all the American and Indian, and I don't think that would have gone particularly well. However, that said, I'm not yet sure, in fact I didn't see in this game how effective air power really was. Cruise missile strikes and ballistic missile strikes are pretty good, but air strikes against units, the ability to put maybe a strike 1 or a strike 2, if something's got a strike value of 5, it's really hard to see how much effect that's going to have on reasonably well marshalled defences, given that they're not really wanting to move, and they're often in good defensive terrain, or they're behind rivers or whatever. It'd be hard to, I think, make that air power really tell, especially in the short term. But there it is. The game's ended on turn 4 with a comprehensive Pakistan win by about, if I look at the VP differential, 56, and they were 7 difference, so 49 point difference. Yeah, pretty comprehensive. What did I do badly then as the Indians? I think I spread the defence too thin. The initiative turns in this. The fact that in an initiative turn the attacker gets to do air naval, but then gets to do a sort of first move and combat, and then a set of move and combat in here, and exploit move and combat, and then a move and combat. They get about 3 times as much activity as the defender, and that's really overwhelming unless you stack carefully to make sure that you're not just going to get overwhelmed. And at that point, can you stack carefully enough not just to get surrounded and cut out of supply? There's a real difficult balance there. It may have been as best for the Indian player not to even move up and try and engage, and just try and stay back beyond where the Pakistan forces could even get to or supply into, without having first taken something else So just give up ground, maybe blow bridges, give up ground, try not to engage, because what happened in this game was that they lost too much ground force to be able to then effectively counterattack in any way, even with the air power that was coming in on their side. They didn't have the ground forces then to capitalise on that. So that was probably quite a serious error. Both sides made, but especially Pakistan, made serious errors in where to put their supply depots. I would whinge about the supply rules in this a little bit, but frankly I can't be bothered. I don't think they're that great. They're okay, but they're not interesting. There's a lot of counting and a lot of, more counting and a lot of counting, but there's not a lot of creativity to be had in the supply game, not like OCS. It's functional, it's fine, it limits what the attacker's doing, it does allow you to cut things out of supply, it does allow you to surround things, it does its job in that respect, but it's just not terribly interesting. And I also find that a little bit, I have to say, with the combat. The combat in this is odds based, and as I say, you want nice big fat odds in your favour, and you'll work to get nice big fat odds in your favour, and then you come onto this huge combat chart here, and it does the OCS thing of Operational Combat Series thing of, you can look what terrain you're in, and that puts you on a different column. So if you're 2 to 1 in open terrain or rough terrain, you're on this 9 column, which is way better than 2 to 1 in urban or whatever, where you're right down here on the 5 column. Fine. You're then allowed to throw in loads of air power and helicopters to modify the dice rolls, and you'll get column shifts for the sort of efficiency ratings of the units and other things that, artillery, and whether you're attacking into a city and surprise and stuff. What I tend to find though, firstly, the ELR ratings across the board are either 5s or 6s, which means that it's a column shift either way, and a column shift ain't that much. It's something, but it ain't that much. Yeah, it's nice to get a column shift in your favour, but if 4 to 5 isn't saving your bacon and 11 to 12 isn't doing much for you, you'll never notice over the course of a game if you rolled on the 11 table all the time or the 12 table all the time. I doubt you'd notice the difference. So a column shift isn't terribly interesting. It's okay. The die roll modifiers from air, well, we didn't get a lot because we didn't get one side with enough of air superiority to also have spare planes to do ground attacking kind of stuff. So there wasn't a lot of that kind of thing. And so what you end up with is quite an odds-based, mathematical factors. Can I get 3 to 1, or can I get 4 to 1? Can I surround it and put everything into that hex? And you get die roll modifiers for attacking from 3 to 4 hexes or 5 to 6 hexes. So you've got more impetus to try and surround a particular thing and attack into it irrespective of what else is around. And it just feels slightly hokey, I have to say. Easy, fine, comfortable to do, don't mind doing it, but it does feel quite old school in a way, quite old school. You're not, you are picking the weakest thing you can find in terrain that looks viable and trying to gang up on it and surround it and gank it, knock it off the board. And if you can do that, you're quids in. What I also find is that, and the comparisons with the Operational Combat Series are because they're both running at a similar sort of time scale. This is a turn every 2 turns to the week, so a turn is every 2.5 days, which I think is roughly what OCS is, turn every 2.5, 3 days. And at that scale, what OCS does says, okay, if these 2 units fight, over the course of 2.5 days, we don't know, or at least we can't decide as players who's got some sort of tactical advantage and who's reconned effectively and who's scouted effectively and who's spotted the enemy positions effectively, and so we don't know whether one side goes in and gets caught in a trap and a crossfire, or whether they attack beautifully and have spotted all the lines of defence and worked out how to counter them and therefore blitz over them with a beautifully coordinated attack, or whether it's just a sort of meeting engagement where both sides fumble around and try and figure out how to adapt in the moment. OCS does that with a surprise roll, where basically you modify a 2d6 roll by the difference in these efficiency numbers, and OCS makes these efficiency numbers massively different. Russian conscripts are zeros, and German, SS units are fives, and that 5-point difference on your surprise roll means that units can suddenly get 5 or 6 column shifts and be away even against seemingly much stronger opposition. This system, although it's operating on a similar timescale and therefore should be abstracting similar sort of things, doesn't have anything like that. And so the combat tends towards the predictable, because you can work out what odds column you're going to be on, you can work out what DRMs you're going to be on. If you have got air power to throw in, and I've played games where you have throwing in air power or helicopters, you can work out what your negatives are going to be, and you can pretty much look at the table and say, okay, I'm going to be here, that's going to be fine, do it. And if you get a slightly better result than you were expecting, boom, great. But it does make it all quite predictable. You're never surprised really by what you're ending up with in a way that OCS gives you, and it gives you more narrative as a result, and more unexpected, heroic defences and surprise attacks and all that kind of stuff that doesn't tend to come out in this. And it could so easily be put into this simply by varying these numbers, having some sort of surprise mechanism, and perhaps allowing the aerial and helicopter factors, instead of just being a dull die roll modifier, allowing them to modify that initial who's got the advantage who's got the tactical advantage roll, rather than the final combat roll. So I think, as it is, it seems a bit bland to me, a little bit bland. There's lots going on. There's cruise missiles, and there's attack helicopters, and there's all this air power, and there's ballistic missiles, and there seem to be all kinds of tokens all over this chart. But when it comes down to it, the actual boots on the ground combat just seems a little bland. So overall, this is a perfectly fine game. Lovely components, really nice map, beautiful counters. Rules aren't entirely complete, but you can find edge cases, but you can find edge cases anywhere if you choose to look. I mean, it's perfectly playable. I've had a really good time playing it. It's solid. The supply solid, movement solid, combat solid, air game's solid. All the tracks, all the stuff, all solid. It's a good solid 7 of a game, maybe 7.5, without really feeling spectacular. But that's absolutely fine, especially for this sort of speculative modern era, which, is extremely hard to try and portray with maps and counters. There's just so much going on and so many potential factors in play that even having a stab at it like this, I think, is pretty commendable. I don't think it's perfect. I don't find it exhilarating in the way that I do perhaps the Operational Combat series, despite its flaws with, perhaps artillery and the air game isn't great, and some of the supply rules can get a bit silly if you allow people Hail Mary attacks running across to mug each other's depots. But I still find it capable of throwing up just a little bit more narrative and excitement and surprise than this. So there it is. Next War, India-Pakistan. A perfectly fine game. Better than fine. A good game, but not a great one.